Hello and welcome to viewers in Scotland and around the world. I'm Janine McNair and this is Broadcasting Scotland on Thursday the 8th of December. This evening on Scotland at 7, I'll be taking you through some of the main news stories of the day and discussing them with our special guest. Maureen Watt is a former MSP representing Aberdeen South and North Kincardine for over 10 years, and previously she represented the North East Scotland constituency. She held the indispensable role of the Minister for Mental Health for the Scottish Government between 2016 and 2018. A very warm welcome to you, Maureen.
Hi, Janine, and welcome to you too. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. First tonight, we have the Ukraine update. This is day 288 of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Vladimir Putin has vowed to continue attacking Ukrainian energy systems despite global criticism of strikes that have left millions without electricity and water at the start of winter. About 10,000 Ukrainian service personnel and roughly the same number of Ukrainian civilians are believed to be being held in Russian detention facilities, according to a Ukrainian official. Explosions have been reported at Berdyansk Air Base in the Zaporizhzhia region. 3 large explosions were heard, as well as smaller ones near the city on the coast of the Sea of Azov. Russian forces have fired more than 1,000 rockets and missiles at Ukraine's power grid, which is still working despite taking major damage, a senior official said. Ukraine has introduced new emergency power cuts as it tried to repair energy infrastructure damaged in Russian airstrikes, which the national grid operator said had caused significant supply shortages. Russian troops are reportedly taking part in tactical exercises in Belarus, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Russia freed the jailed US basketball star Brittany Griner today in a high-level prisoner exchange for the notorious arms dealer Victor Bout, who had been held in a US prison for 12 years. President Biden expressed regret that the deal did not include Paul Whelan, an American jailed since December 2018 on espionage charges that his family and the US government say are baseless. The EU plans to tighten up sanctions on Russia's military and industrial complex, pro-Kremlin media, and Russian nationalist groups fighting in Ukraine, according to leaked documents. Russian shelling killed 10 people and wounded many others in the town of Kurakov in eastern Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has said. President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia's war in Ukraine could turn into a long-term process. Putin also claimed that Russia would not use nuclear weapons first in any conflict and denied that Russian troops were deserting en masse from the field of battle. The risk of nuclear weapons being used in the Ukraine conflict has lessened thanks to international pressure on Russia, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said in an interview published today. An Orthodox priest accused of leaking information on Ukrainian defense positions to Russia has been sentenced to 12 years in prison, according to the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. And now on to our next story. Dominic Raab's Bill of Rights is likely to be axed. Dominic Raab's controversial Bill of Rights may be axed again, as a senior Tory MP said they were confident that wise heads in Number 10 would lead the government to perform yet another U-turn on the bill. After a series of climb-downs by Rishi Sunak this week over planning and long-promised pieces of legislation, the former Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, urged him to avoid a protracted parliamentary battle that could take up hundreds of hours of time. The Prime Minister is said to have told RAB he is minded to deprioritise the bill, given concerns that it could spark a row between Tory MPs and it could be blocked by the House of Lords, stalling the progress of other bills. The Bill of Rights has been RAB's pet project for years. He proposed it under David Cameron and revived the idea under Boris Johnson before Liz Truss scrapped it during her short-lived administration. Sunak promised to bring the bill back, but MPs have not yet begun debating it, and there is no date for them to start doing so. The Scottish Government have said that they would not support the bill in the Scottish Parliament. So, Maureen, I wondered, what are your views on this bill and how do you see it moving forward?
Well, Janine, I have to confess that I haven't read any of Dominic Raab's proposals on this, but the fact that we're seeing yet another U-turn by Rishi Sunak's government shows what a mess it's in. I mean, they say that there isn't time for other legislation, but to be honest, I can't think of any really meaningful bits of legislation that have come forward from Rishi Sunak's government yet that are making progress through the House of Commons. So while I'm glad to see that his proposals, which clearly haven't been thought out properly and aren't in line with other proposed government legislation, and probably that's why it's getting the dunt yet again. While I welcome that, it does show a government completely in chaos. And is this what we are going to see election is?
Thanks, Maureen. And do you think that perhaps the recent claims of bullying against Dominic Raab may have any effect on the credibility?
Well, yes, I do think his credibility is shot. I mean, it's more than one. These claims of bullying are coming from more than one source, more than one government department, and government departments are unlikely to have been colluding on this. So it does make you wonder why on earth Rishi Sunak not only has him in his cabinet, but also he is the deputy prime minister. Isn't he? So if Rishi Sunak is away, he will stand in and has done, stood in for him, taking PMQs. So why he has such a high profile in the government beats me, because he doesn't seem to be a nice person. Certainly, it would seem, doesn't know how to treat civil servants. And that doesn't, to me, make for good government, because if you haven't got your civil servants on side, then it's very difficult to draw up good legislation as that it's in a state to be taken through the legislature, in this case the House of Commons, and passed successfully without too many amendments, which can end up wrecking the original tensions of bills. So it doesn't bode well for good government from Westminster.
Thanks for your comments, Maureen. Now we're going to move on to our next story, which is the UK government green light for the new coal mine in Cumbria. The UK government has given the green light to a new coal mine in Cumbria, the first in the UK for more than 30 years. But already moves have begun to challenge the decision before construction work can start. Climate campaigners are examining the decision with a view to a legal challenge based on the UK's national and international legally binding climate commitments. NGOs are expected to ask their lawyers to look for grounds to bring a High Court claim against the planning permission. Successful legal action could see the courts striking down the government's decision, sending it back to ministers to redetermine. Tony Bosworth, an energy campaigner at Friends of the Earth, said, quote, "The evidence against this mine is huge. It will have a significant impact on UK climate targets, while the market for coal is already disappearing. The UK steel industry wants to move to greener production, like its counterparts in mainland Europe, who are rapidly moving away from coal. Another threat to the mine's future is the general election that must take place within the next 2 years. Opposition parties have all made clear their disagreement to the new mine. Caroline Lucas, the Green Party MP for Brighton Pavilion, vowed to keep fighting. This government has backed a climate-busting, backward-looking, business-wrecking, standard asset coal mine. This mine is a climate crime against humanity, and such a reckless desire to dig up our dirty fossil fuel past will be challenged every step of the way, she said. Protesters are also gearing up to take local action at the site of the mine, and any banks and investors that finance the mine will also be put under pressure in public campaigns. Well, Maureen, I think this story is rather surprising to many of us because I think we associate coal mining really with the past, and we think back to even the Victorian times and the conditions. It seems rather incongruous in the present day. What is your own view on this story? Were you surprised?
Well, it has been talked about for quite some time now, but the fact that it has been given the go-ahead does absolutely shock me. And as you say, Janine, in this day and age, to be thinking about opening a coal mine, whether it's deep coal mining or open cast, is absolutely outrageous when we are developing and have developed so many other sources of energy. And I was listening to Lord Deanan, who's chair of the Climate Change Committee, I think is his title. Uh, yeah,
Yes,
the
the
former
Climate
John
Change
Gummer.
Committee, yes.
Yeah, the former John Gummer, yes. Last night, and he was absolutely horrified as well. I mean, the argument of those going ahead with the mine is that it will provide something like 500 jobs in Cumbria, where the unemployment rate, the claim is high. It's actually not any higher than elsewhere. But he was making the point that Cumbria already has the nuclear plant at Sellafield, and if England are going ahead with more nuclear plants, thank God Scotland isn't, because we don't need to, then why not build a new nuclear plant near the existing one, rather than he was claiming down at Sizewell, where they're going for a third nuclear plant, and where the unemployment rate is much lower. But I think in terms of Cumbria itself, it gives it a very bad reputation, and people go to Cumbria, as we know, to the lakes and to the beautiful scenery there. So all in all, I'm not sure that the wider population in Cumbria are going to be all enamored with having the reputation that they have a new coal mine in their area.
Thank you for your insights into that, Maureen. And I don't know if you've heard anything about the funding of this coal mine. Some news sources are claiming that some of the funding is coming from the Cayman Islands offshore accounts, which perhaps makes the situation even more difficult to swallow.
Yes, it certainly does. Because I think I was speaking to someone from the city of London not all that long ago, and I think financiers are perhaps slowly but increasingly becoming more aware of ethical investment. And I think the fact that it's coming from the Cayman Islands just shows you the state of the economy, and where rich people are hiding away their funds in these offshore accounts and offshore havens, um, and then putting it back into what we are increasingly deeming as unethical investments in this country, and shame on them.
Thanks, Maureen. We're moving on to our next story now, which is that millions of people cannot afford to heat their homes as the UK faces an Arctic snap. More than 3 million low-income UK households cannot afford to heat their homes, according to research, as a dangerously cold weather front arrives from the Arctic. The UK Health Security Agency has issued a cold weather alert recommending vulnerable people warm their homes to at least 18 degrees centigrade, wear extra layers, and eat hot food to protect themselves from plummeting temperatures. UK government ministers confirmed that people in more than 300 postcode areas in England and Wales could or would receive cold weather payments in the coming days. The £25 payments are triggered when the average temperature is 0 degrees or less for 7 days in a row. However, about 710,000 households will still struggle to pay for warm clothing, heating and food, according to an analysis by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. A fifth of the 2.5 million low-income households were going without food and heating, it estimated. The JRF survey of 4,251 people in the bottom 40% of incomes, which was conducted last month, also estimated that about 4.3 million households had curbed their spending on heating before the cold spell. More than 7 million households have gone without at least one of the essentials since June, the JRF report is expected to say when it is released next week. About 2.4 million households have borrowed money or used credit to cover their bills so far this year. The current cold snap means households with vulnerable people face the impossible decision over whether to take on more debt to heat their home to the level recommended by health professionals. Rachel Earwaker, a senior economist at JRF, said, "The government must see that families will not be able to get through the winter on the current levels of support. There have long been concerns that the level of cold weather payments are insufficient for many parts of Scotland where temperatures are frequently much colder for longer than the rest of the UK." So, Maureen, this story, of course, is totally at home for us right now because we are here in Scotland and we know exactly how cold it is. What would be your feelings, your interpretation of this story, especially the mismatch perhaps between the difference in temperatures in England and Wales and what we experience here in Scotland?
Yes, well, cold snaps are pretty regular for us from this time of year on right through, can be till well into the spring. And here in the northeast at the moment, we have a yellow warning in our area for freezing temperatures and snow, and it is very cold. And the cold weather payments being triggered, I think waiting for 7 days is far too long, and it needs to be looked at again, especially in the current economic climate when people are really struggling to heat their homes and keep warm. I mean, keeping warm is absolutely essential, and we know that deaths from hypothermia go up in the winter, and it's an absolute scandal in one of the richest countries in the world that this is happening. And you mentioned it was the bottom 40% of households. That is a huge number of households that are facing this crisis about how to keep warm this winter because of the reckless economic policies of Liz Truss and the rest of these Tory governments that we've had in the past 4 years. One thing that I haven't seen, and I don't know if it's been published, is what the a level of energy, domestic energy consumption is at the moment. I mean, have over the past few weeks since this economic crisis, have people been really cutting down on domestic energy consumption? It would be good to know, because we know that people are economizing as really hard on this, and some people are having to resort to having meters installed rather than meters taken out for electricity because they pay such a higher rate. So this is a really severe crisis for so many people in our population, and so needless as well, because other countries are managing to keep caps on the rise in energy prices. But here in the UK, we seem quite happy to let them rip.
Thanks, Maureen. And I suppose with your experience as an MSP and being based in Aberdeenshire, you've really got knowledge firsthand. Of course, the situation right now is exacerbated because of the economic situation. But in terms of how people suffer these cold spells and how they struggle to pay, you certainly have firsthand experience, I'm sure.
Yes, and yes, I have over the years, and we've got an excellent organisation in Aberdeen that serves the whole of the Northeast, which is Scarf Save. Oh God, I can't remember. And save costs and reduce fuel. I think it is Scarf, who help people with insulation and new heating systems if they qualify for that. But it's really heartening to see how many organisations are stepping forward to provide warm banks. Good heavens, food banks has been bad enough to thaw, but having to have warm banks as well is just yet another example of failing Westminster government. But it's good to see that so many places are coming forward, community centres and libraries and various other organisations like churches, to provide warm places for people to come, and perhaps as well as warmth in terms of heating, but also warmth in terms of hot food. So it's great that this community spirit is helping in that area. But very undignified, really, isn't it, for people who don't deserve to be treated like this.
Thanks, Maureen. On to our next story now. Labour refused to promise the repeal of Tory anti-strike laws. Labour has refused to promise to repeal the Conservatives' proposed anti-strike laws, despite calling them unworkable and grandstanding. At a business leaders event today, neither Sir Keir Starmer nor Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, would commit to reverse the proposals, which include strict curbs on when public sector workers can strike if Labour wins the next election. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, promised tough new laws to limit strikes, as Border Force Guards became the latest group to announce they plan to walk out in the coming weeks. The government is already working on legislation to insist that transport workers always provide set minimum levels of service, while Mr Sunak has refused to rule out completely banning emergency service workers from striking. Mr Starmer called the legislation wrong, but would not commit to scrapping it if it becomes law. Reeves said that committing to repeal was jumping the gun a little bit. The two Labour MPs were speaking to an audience of business leaders at Canary Wharf as part of the party's Prawn Cocktail Offensive 2.0, which is seeking to repeat Tony Blair's success in persuading business leaders to back Labour. Today's event included speeches by Amanda Blanc, the Chief Executive of Aviva, and Ian Stewart, the Chief Executive of HSBC UK. Jim O'Neill, the former Goldman Sachs banker and Treasury Minister under David Cameron, also spoke at the event. Well, Maureen, this is a story that has been in the news so much over the last few months, especially with the high-profile strikes by RMT union and the picket lines that we saw on mainstream media over the last few months. We know that there was a case as well with one Labour MP who went along to the picket line. I think it was in August or September, and then he was reprimanded by his leader, by Keir Starmer. How do you see this developing, this situation? Do you think that Labour have got some responsibility and to the running of the country and could be justified in this action, or do you see things from another perspective?
Well, I think it shows just how far Labour has fallen and lost its soul in terms of what a Labour Party should be doing and representing the workers of the United Kingdom as it is at present. I mean, this is all about having an eye on the next general election and virtually saying nothing that will upset any apple carts, and kowtowing to business and trying to placate them so that they perhaps do not say very much in the run-up to the next election. We all know how it works. But it's just absolutely unbelievable that a Labour Party should move so far to the right. And Stephen Flynn was absolutely right yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions when he said that the Tory party had got Labour fully onto its agenda. And this is an example the very next day of what he meant by this. I mean, all parties do this schmoozing, the City of London and the trade unions and business in the run-up to elections. But I think it shows how devoid of any principles political parties in Westminster, the unionist parties, have become. Absolutely shocking.
Thanks, Maureen. So the next story is that Pete Wishart is stepping back from the SNP Westminster Group frontbench. Pete Wishart has announced today that he will be stepping back from frontbench politics. In a tweet, the Perth and North Perthshire MP said, quote, "For the first time in 21 years, I will serve the Westminster Group from the back bench. My resignation letter to Stephen will say that, and he will continue to have my full support." The SNP's new Westminster Group leader responded to Mr. Wishart in a tweet, thanking him for his many years of service. Stephen's message said, quote, "Pete, thank you for your exemplary service for the SNP on the front bench in Westminster over so many years. As ever, my door remains open and I look forward to working with you as we support colleagues in Holyrood, hold the Tories to account and work to deliver independence." Glasgow South East MP Stuart MacDonald has also announced his intention to step back from his position as the SNP's Shadow Defence spokesperson. Stephen Flynn is expected to announce a new frontbench team over the next few days. He has already announced that West Dunbartonshire MP Martin Docherty-Hughes will take over from Owen Thompson as Chief Whip. Well, Maureen, I think this story is, again, quite close to home for you with all your experience as an MP yourself. Do you have any comments on these moves?
Well, I think it's kind of normal if a new leader comes in, they want to have a new front bench and a new group of spokespeople, and perhaps give people who have been backbenchers a chance on the front bench. This is quite typical when new leaders come in. It was when Nicola Sturgeon replaced Alex Salmond when I was in the Scottish Parliament. This happened, and although, thank goodness, in the Scottish Parliament we have few cabinet reshuffles are like they do in Westminster, and people are given the chance to really get on top of their brief in the Scottish Government. I think this is quite normal when a new leader comes in place, and it'll be interesting to see how the new shadow cabinet for the SNP forms in Westminster. I'm quite sad to see Ian Blackford go, and also Stuart MacDonald has made a big impression on in the defence brief, in particular in relation to Ukraine. I'm sorry to see that experience go, but new people will come with new renewed vigour and new eyes perhaps, and so I'm sure it'll all work out in the end. We'll still be holding Westminster to account at a very high level.
Thanks, Maureen. Now, an international story. Iran carries out the first known execution over anti-government protests. Iran has conducted the first known execution in relation to the anti-government protests that have rocked the country, hanging a man who was found guilty by a revolutionary court of, quote, waging war against God under Sharia law. Mohsen Shekari had been sentenced to death for allegedly blocking a street and wounding a member of the pro-regime Basij militia on the 25th of September during the early phase of the protests triggered by the death in custody of Mahsa Amini. State media published a video of what it said was Shekari's confession, in which he appeared with a bruise on his right cheek. The court found he had used the weapon with the intention of killing, causing terror and disturbing the order and security of society. He appealed against the verdict, but it was upheld by Iran's Supreme Court on the 20th of November. His family waited outside the jail where he was executed, seeking news of his fate. Rights groups have said that Shekari was tortured and forced to confess. Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, the director of the Oslo-based group Iran Human Rights, called for a strong international reaction. Otherwise, we will be facing daily executions of protesters, he said. Also in Iran, The Guardian is reporting that security forces are targeting women at anti-regime protests with shotgun fire to their faces, breasts, and genitals, according to interviews with medics across the country. Doctors and nurses who are treating demonstrators in secret to avoid arrest said that they first observed this practice after noticing that women often arrived with different wounds to men. Men had more commonly shotgun pellets in their legs, buttocks, and backs. One physician from the central Isfahan province said he believed the authorities were targeting men and women in different ways because they wanted to destroy the beauty of these women. One doctor said, "I treated a woman in her early 20s who was shot in her genitals by 2 pellets." Activists say that such horrific gender-based violence is no surprise given the misogynistic rule of Iran's Ayatollahs, who took power in the 1979 revolution and have maintained control with brute force, often against women. Maureen, this is a very disturbing story, and I think many of us, I'm sure you included, have been following the situation in Iran since September when the young woman was taken to police custody and later died there, having removed her hijab. This latest story is, of course, deeply disturbing because as women ourselves as well, we think about the pain and the terrible trauma that must be going on there in Iran at this time. How do you feel that the international community should move on this one? I mean, the human rights organization in Oslo had requested international reaction, saying that it was actually necessary to avoid more executions like the one that took place just in the last couple of days. I mean, there are two separate stories here: the execution, and secondly, the terrible injuries being faced by female supporters, especially. How do you think the international community should react on this? Do you have any ideas?
Well, can I first of all say that is one of the most disturbing accounts of what's going on in a country that I have ever had to listen to. I find it, I mean, I can barely speak just thinking about what you said. I mean, it is just so barbaric to think that soldiers working for a government are prepared to do that to their fellow citizens, to their fellow, to their women, to their wives, to their mothers, to their female children, in order to support an absolutely barbaric government trying to hold on to power. I mean, through a dictatorship of the Ayatollahs, and it's very difficult to know what the international community can do, especially when, you know, Iran's oil is now being used and being bought to make up for losses in from Russia. But you know, if you could just treat Iran as a totally pariah state, I think it would be really good. But at the same time, through subtle measures, being able to help the NGOs and the peacekeepers and the doctors working in the hospitals there treating people. It's very difficult to know how the international community should respond unless it does so through, for example, the United Nations on a concerted, united front. But I find that report, Janine, really, really disturbing.
Yes, of course, Maureen. And I'm sure that many of us are going to continue to follow the situation in Iran as closely as possible, given the news that's coming out of Iran may not always be as transparent, of course, as we would like. But thank you, Maureen. We're moving on now to our story about COVID-19 vaccines. It's been 2 years now since COVID-19 vaccines have been in our lives. More than 14.9 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccination have been administered in Scotland since the first jab was given exactly 2 years ago. The initial effort to protect people from the deadly virus was the biggest logistical operation Scotland had seen since the Second World War. Thousands of volunteers signed up to help NHS staff. Mass vaccination centres were rapidly assembled in major cities and mobile units toured the country. The rapid deployment meant 1 million Scots were jabbed within 3 months, averting 27,656 deaths, according to the World Health Organization, which noted Scotland's quick uptake. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf said, "On this day, we must first remember all those who have lost a loved one to this virus and reflect on what has been an incredibly challenging time for everyone. As a nation, we can be incredibly proud of our world-leading vaccination programme. This could not have happened without the incredible efforts of staff and volunteers across the country. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has not gone away, and I continue to urge everyone to take up the offer of a vaccination when they become eligible. Over to you, Maureen.
Well,
Any comments?
yeah, I mean, it is an absolutely wonderful success story. And, we take our hats off and dedicate our thanks to those working in the front line of COVID, but those who worked out the logistics of getting the population vaccinated as quickly as possible, and then with subsequent rounds of boosters, has been absolutely remarkable and shows dedication in all those who worked out about how to deliver it so quickly and efficiently, and encourage so many people in Scotland to take up the jab, which, although COVID is still around, and indeed I was at a quiz night a week past Saturday, and 5 or 6 people have come down with COVID that I know have come down with COVID since that. So yes, it is very much still around, but thank the Lord that it's not the killer that it was initially pre-vaccination. I mean, I have asthma, and I'm sure I wouldn't have managed to survive COVID if I'd got COVID prior to the vaccination. So I think, like me, millions of people are eternally grateful that we have a great vaccine uptake and rollout. And we see the contrast in China, where they're still experiencing huge lockdowns because they haven't even managed to vaccinate all their old folks. So when you see that comparison, it shows the great success story that the COVID vaccination rollout has been 2 years on. How much longer it will have to continue, it looks as if it's going to have to continue as long as COVID is around, and hopefully we don't see new strains, so that the vaccination might have to be more frequent. So yeah, a great success story for our NHS and all the volunteers. And I saw an interesting tweet the other day which said, I had to wait all of 120 seconds to get vaccinated. I'm sure somebody will find something wrong with that. So a good news story for the NHS.
Thanks, Maureen. Now, local authorities have published their plans for closing the poverty-related attainment gap. This is a story about the Scottish Government mission to close the attainment gap. Councils across Scotland have set their own stretch aims for children and young people's progress in literacy and numeracy levels, for senior phase qualifications achieved, as well as for the number of young people participating in education, training or employment. For both overall attainment and in terms of closing the poverty-related attainment gap in literacy and numeracy, the collective stretch aims of local authorities demonstrate ambitions to work towards achieving the biggest 2-year improvement recorded since the introduction of the Scottish Attainment Challenge. This work will be supported by the Scottish Government's £1 billion Scottish Attainment Challenge, with £43 million in strategic equity funding allocated to local authorities this year. In total, more than £130 million has been distributed to schools so far this year to help close the poverty-related attainment gap. Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Shirley Ann Somerville, said, "We are committed to substantially eliminating the poverty-related attainment gap, and councils have a crucial role in driving this national mission forward at a local level. Given the effect of COVID-19 on children and young people's achievement of curriculum for excellence levels in 2020-2021, These collective aims represent significant local ambition for recovery back to and beyond the national position pre-pandemic, aiming to narrow the poverty-related attainment gap by over 7 percentage points in both primary school literacy and numeracy compared to 2020 or 21. Well, Maureen, I think you heard the story there, and do you feel optimistic about this latest endeavour to close the attainment gap yet further?
So the Scottish Government were making real progress in this really difficult task pre the pandemic, and things were really beginning to show a difference in closing the attainment gap. And of course, the COVID pandemic has upset much of this. And I think we have to remember that this is not something that can be fixed overnight. It is a long-term ingrained problem in our society. And there are so many different aspects that have to come together in order for us to make a difference in young people's lives. And it starts with things like the baby box and the First Minister's reading challenge, and having vulnerable 2-year-olds go to nursery earlier than others. All sorts of things need to be in line in order for us to begin to make a real difference in young people's lives. And as I say, we were beginning and are again beginning to see real differences in individual people's lives. Those who, for example, in secondary school take a foundation apprenticeship in place of one subject can be seen to really re-engage again with education and see the value of education. I mean, in one of the schools in my constituency, I still sponsor a prize for someone who's had that light bulb moment and seen that education is really important and can make a difference. So it's good that the schools are getting increased equity funding, and the teachers are best placed to see where that money can best be spent and where it can make that difference. But as I say, it really is, it's a great ambition, but it's really something that is quite difficult to fix in many families because of generations of lives based in poverty, and where ambition has literally gone out the window, and no real future is seen as being possible for them. So it's really good that we continue to make such an effort to close this in a country, in the UK, where division of wealth is getting so much wider instead of narrowing. And independence could make such a difference if we saw a redistribution of wealth, as well as all these other methods that the Scottish Government is undertaking.
Right, thank you so much for your very worthwhile comments on this issue, Maureen. Our next story is about a new support for families of loved ones who are killed abroad. Families of loved ones killed abroad are to receive additional support at a time when people need help the most. The Scottish Government is providing grant funding to Victim Support Scotland, which provides a specialist service offering financial and emotional support to families resident in Scotland who are affected by an overseas murder or culpable homicide. The enhancement of services for loved ones stems in part from feedback from a UK all-party parliamentary group on death abroad, consular services and assistance. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office also continues to partner with Victim Support Scotland to provide enhanced consular support for families who have been bereaved through homicide and, in some cases, of suspicious death abroad. This partnership provides a route to help families meet costs such as repatriation and translation services. Kate Wallace, Chief Executive of Victim Support Scotland, said, "This grant will make a tangible and practical difference to families who are bereaved by murder or culpable homicide abroad. In addition to the trauma of losing a family member in this way, families often contend with issues and additional expenditure around international travel, language differences, dealing with the legal system of another country, and the repatriation of their family member." I'm going to move on to the next story because I'm watching the time a little bit here. And the next story is about Judy Murray leading tennis. She is a leading tennis coach and she's going to lead workshops at Strathclyde University. The internationally renowned tennis coach, Judy Murray, has led workshops at the University of Strathclyde for student teachers of physical education. The coach and mother of champion players Andy and Jamie visited Strathclyde to guide students on the university's PGDE physical education programme in the sessions. Based on a teaching resource she has developed with the aim of helping tennis to flourish across Scotland. The resource, produced in collaboration with Education Scotland, offers adaptable activities and teaching strategies to future teachers who could nurture the successors to the Murray brothers. It is designed to be taught to school pupils aged between 5 and 18. Features of the resource include video clips to demonstrate and explain a range of practices and games using a variety of equipment. Sections focused on specific types of equipment, including rackets, balls, bean bags, and juggling squares. Material designed particularly for primary and secondary learners. Judy Murray said, "Teachers and practitioners are the key to growing tennis in Scotland, and this resource supports all of them to deliver tennis in a fun, stimulating, and engaging way. None of the content in the course requires a tennis court. Each practice and game can be adapted and used in whatever space is available, making tennis accessible to everyone." A quick comment about that one, Maureen. I don't know if you have any particular interest in tennis or if you think it's a valuable program for Judy to be pushing.
Absolutely. I was just remembering that in the 1970s, when I did my PGCE, you had to do a sport, and I did tennis coaching. It was only because of Margaret Thatcher taking on the teachers in the 70s that extracurricular coaching by teachers of other subjects apart from PE stopped doing that. So it's great that this is being reintroduced, and that teachers of other subjects are seeing the value of physical education in helping children learn the other subjects that we have to in schools. So yes, actually, I have a great interest in this, and Judy Murray is coming to one of our community centres shortly to do coaching with young children and youngsters at the community centre. So she's a great advocate for her support for her sport in Scotland.
That's great to hear, Maureen. Thank you. Well, that is it for this evening. And before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you all very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. Good night and thank you for watching.